We have a lot of fun things for you. What kinds of things do we do at VBS? Who knows? Zena. Crafts. What else? Campbell. Games. Matthew. Bible lesson. That's the most important thing. DJ. Snack. That's the second most important thing. Olivia. Games. We sing songs. We do all kinds of really fun things. And we are really glad you are here tonight. So, wait, for those of you who were here last night, what did we learn about this? Who remembers what we learned about yesterday? Matthew? What about the world? What, Lexi? The dark and the light. And who made the light? Jesus and God made the light. And tonight we're going to learn more about it. But we're going to get started by singing some songs. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lee. He's going to get us started with some songs.
All right. So I think this first one we're going to need to stand up. Okay? Now, don't hit the people next to you. Okay? Do we have our legs ready? Do we have our arms ready? Okay, we might need that. Either that or we just go like this and just kind of hang out and do this for a little while. What do you think? I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never fly over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, sir! All right. Okay, go ahead and sit down, sit down, sit down. Do we know I'm a C?
Some of them.
C? I'm a C-H-R-A-S-T. I am a C. I am a C-H. I am a C-H-R-I-S-T-I-A-M. And I have C-H-R-I-S-T and my H-E-A-R-T and I will L-I-V-E-E-T-E-R-M-A-L-L-Y. I am a C. I am a C-H. I am a C-H-R-I-S-T-I-A-M. And I have C-H-R-I-S-T in my H-E-A-R-T and I will L-I-V-E-E-T-E-R-M-A-L-L-Y. I think we can do it faster. I am a C. I am a C-H. I am a C-H-R-I-S-T-I-A-M. And I have C-H-R-I-S-T in my H-E-A-R-T and I will L-I-V-E-E-T-E-R-M-A-L-L-Y. Yes! All right! Yeah! We had a request last night from Mr. Nate. We have a peace like a river. I have peace like a river, I got peace like a river, I got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got joy like a fountain, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I like that one. Yeah. Are we having fun? Yeah. Are we having? Okay, good. So we did one last night, but I think that we need to do it every night because it goes to the whole thing about God making everything for us. Because only someone who was really big to do something so really, really cool. Right? Do we have a little God?
No.
Is he kind of a medium-sized God?
No.
My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. The mountains are his and the valleys are his and the trees are his handiwork too. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do for you. All right. Okay. I think we are ready. Are we ready?
Yeah!
I can hear you. I think we're ready. So,
last night we talked about lights and some colors. And when God created the plants in this world, he created them in so many different colors. And wouldn't our world be boring without the plants that we have all over the place giving us color? And we use color for two things. One, to enjoy the beauty, right, of God's creation. But animals and humans use plants for something else very important. Who can tell me what that is? What do we use plants for? What do animals use plants for? Nobody know? Gabe? For food! Food, delicious, yummy food. Okay? Now, I happen to be talking to one of my friends who works at a zoo, and she was telling me about the elephants. They eat so much food. They spend 12 to 18 hours a day just eating food. Okay? What do elephants eat? Okay, lettuce. Peanuts. They don't eat peanuts if they are in captivity. Most of the time, what do they eat? Huh? No. Oh, Matthew? She said eggs. He said eggs. Katie? Leaves. Lots of leaves. And what do you think, John Mark? Is that what you were going to say? Grass. Lots of grass, okay? And plants. And so how do you think they need to brush their teeth? No. They do. They do. So my friend from the zoo asked me if I could make for elephants some toothpaste. What? Okay. So, how do you think you make elephant toothpaste? Think you need some soap?
Very carefully.
So,
Do you think you need a little or a lot of toothpaste for an elephant? They have those long what? Tusks.
Do you all know what fluoride is? In your toothpaste, it makes it nice, your teeth nice and strong and healthy. Okay.
My God is so
Big. So strong and so mighty.
We're going to put the fluoride in our toothpaste. Should we make it colorful? Yeah. What do you think? What colors should we add? Brown. I have blue, green, red, I heard red and blue. So let's add some red down that side. And we'll add some blue down this side.
brush their teeth?
Alright. You know what else elephants do? They drink a lot of water. How much water do you think an elephant drinks? This is 1 gallon of water.
Deep and wide.
How many gallons of water a day? 2,000. 2,000? Campbell? A day? Not quite a day. 200. What do you think, Ellen? No. 53. 50 gallons a day. Okay, so they drink a lot of water.
Wait, where's it going?
Maybe we should give them 1 or maybe 2 glasses at a time. What do you think? Can we get Mr. Miles wet? Yeah!
Whoa! There's one in the bottom.
Where'd the water go?
There's 2.
I don't think so.
There's 2
There's
cups. Oh,
What?
absorbed it.
What absorbed it? The cup?
Science.
Science. What happened to it?
Whoa!
How did that happen? The cup was empty.
It froze.
Oh, it did not freeze. This is the same stuff that we put in something that you all used at one point. What do you think, Matthew? No.
Wrong end, Matthew.
What do you think, Zena? Diapers. This is what's in your diapers. Alright. I've got one more to show you. Just for fun. Just for fun. How many of you have seen snow? Do you know that scientists can make snow? Mr. Miles, fill that with water.
Alright, let's get some water in there.
What has to happen to water to turn into snow? What do you think? Freeze. Well, how are we going to make this freeze? Put chemicals. Well, we'll put some food coloring in it. You see it? Turn into snow. You guys see down there? It's all hard for some of you. What's happening? Some blue snow. Oh, I can see the blue a little bit better. See that? And now we have some snow. And you can make that. All right, that's it for today.
Alright, great job with our science. Alright, so we are going to get going. So we're going to dismiss our youngest kiddos first. So if you have a red lace on your actually, you know what? Do you want to go first, Miss Karen? You can go left. Alright, so if you have a red lace, you are going to go with Miss Kaylee and Miss Jamie tonight. Okay, so let's line up. Right here.
Ladies like the
last night we started off with the introduction to the series and discussed why creation matters. And then we looked at natural selection, which is one of the key issues that people like to use to support evolution, and we showed how natural selection is really an evidence of a design. You put the ability for things to become a variety of things within a genetic code. It shows an intelligence behind the designer. So we're going to finish today going through the ethics, and then we'll go on from there. We started discussing the ethical implications of evolution. And so we'll go ahead and start with the video, and then we'll go through the PowerPoint.
I would say that the grand theory of evolution is a mixture of science and philosophy. And the philosophy is more dominant nowadays than the science. Science is used to back up the philosophy and naturalism.
What I find is that most people, most evolutionists, have never critically examined their own position. It's such a sacred cow, even in their own minds, it's unthinkable to start examining the weaknesses. It's an amazing stronghold.
And so I guess I'm trying to suggest why the creation-evolution debate isn't the sort of logical argument that you'll get among scientists when they're discussing, say, the role of sunlight in triggering flowering. But with the creation-evolution issue, if evolution is not true, then it means we're created. And if biblical creation is true, then it means it's the God of the Bible to whom we're accountable to. And that, for many people, is a no-go zone.
You know, if you want to consider yourself part of the intellectual elite, you must be a Darwinist. It's that simple. It's like the fee you pay to get into the club. And so this is a very, very strong motivator. And there's a flip side to that, which is if you don't hold it, you will be ridiculed and treated as if you're really stupid and really ignorant. And so the fear of ridicule is just palpable on campuses. There are many, many scientists who actually realize that there are major problems with Darwinian theory, but they are silent because they know if they speak their doubts, they will get in trouble. They won't get grants, they won't get funding, they won't be politically correct, they won't have friends. All the stuff that makes for academic success goes away if you question Darwin. So, if evolution is true, many honest evolutionists acknowledge there is no rational basis for morality.
It opens up the prospect of all sorts of things like what really is ultimately wrong with abortion. I mean, after all, if you've got an unwanted pregnancy, why not terminate it? What does it really matter ultimately? What if someone is old and unproductive? They're a burden on society. Society has to support them, feed them, care for them. Why not just help them along the way, get rid of them, you know?
Now, there's some moral implications there. If the Creator made us, then He owns us and has a right to make the rules for us. But if things made themselves, then there's no right or wrong. We're just really bags of rearranged pond scum. So what is murder? It's just one bag of chemicals impacting another bag of chemicals. Science can't tell you that murder is right or wrong. It can tell you that this action will kill something. It won't tell you that it's right or wrong.
This issue of evolution affects so many things in people's lives. It affects the way they feel about themselves. It affects the way people treat one another. It affects their attitude to motivation for living. It affects the way they regard law in their country. It affects the value that they place on other human beings.
Now, Many critics of Christianity point to various religious wars, the Crusades, the Inquisitions. Now, first of all, these people were acting inconsistently with the teachings of Christ. Second, the numbers are minuscule compared to the atrocities committed by atheist regimes in the 20th century. Now, evolution has been used as a basis for society, and that society was the society of Nazi Germany. Now, Hitler was definitely trying to put Darwin's ideas into practice, like the idea of survival of the fittest, which means death of the unfit. Hitler believed that some races were more highly evolved than others, but the Jewish race was subhuman, he believed.
And so if we take the ideas of evolution, we attempt to apply them to ourselves, the result is not pretty. It's hideous. It's evil.
Now, I'm actually Jewish ethnically, and of course, my people were almost wiped out in Europe. 6 million of us were butchered by this evolutionary philosophy. And handicapped people were thought of as being less than human. Hitler's own propaganda films said, "We have sinned grievously against the law of natural selection by allowing the handicapped people to live."
Menschen haben gegen dieses Gesetz der natürlichen Auslese in den letzten Jahrzehnten furchtbar gesündigt. Wir haben unwertes Leben nicht nur erhalten, wir haben ihm auch Vermehrung gewährt. Die Nachkommen dieser Kranken sahen so aus, in denen Tausende lallende Schwachsinnige künstlich ernährt und gepflegt werden müssen, die tiefer stehen als jedes Tier.
So Hitler replaced the Judeo-Christian ethic of sanctity of innocent life made in God's image with an evolutionary ethic that whatever's good for the evolution of the master race is good for society. After the war, the leading Nazis were put on trial, but some of them claimed they did nothing wrong because the laws of our country said it was okay to kill Jews. So on what grounds can you put them on trial? Only if there's a higher morality than national law. But where can this morality come from if not from the creator of humanity? If we just rearrange pond scum, there's no such thing as a higher law.
Mankind is capable of doing all sorts of evil against other men. And to think that we might have kind of gotten this out of our system, or that we're structured our societies in ways that this can't happen again, is naive. If powerful people take on ideas that are poisonous, the result is the death of people.
The last century was the most blood-stained in all of human history. And this was not due to religious wars, some people like to point to. It was at the hand of genocidal, mass-murdering governments led by men like Hitler and Stalin and Chairman Mao and Pol Pot. Now, all of these regimes had one thing in common, and that was a devout belief in evolution. This caused them to view people as nothing more than animals to be culled. I mean, Mao regarded himself as a disciple of Darwin. Hitler even wrote that struggle is the father of all things. He who does not want to fight in this world where eternal struggle is the law of life has no right to exist. Now, a lot of people say this is maybe stretching things too far, but what if you were one of the ones consigned to the gulags or the gas chambers or the firing squads? And you also believed in evolution? What basis would you have for saying that they were wrong or acting inconsistently for what both of you believe?
But have we really learned from history? Because the same philosophy behind Nazi Germany, which is evolution, is now being mandated in the government schools across the nations in the Western world. So should we be surprised that some of the consequences will also follow? Already we're having leading philosophers and so-called bioethicists talking about killing babies after birth if they're not fit enough.
It's difficult to anticipate what any one society would do if it fully adopted an evolutionary view. Because if you try and derive morality from the animal kingdom, for example, there are all sorts of moralities that you might choose. Because when we look to the natural world to define a morality statement, what we find is that all sorts of different animals make their way in the world by doing all sorts of different things.
while there's beauty in nature, there's also horror. I mean, as Tennyson wrote, it is red in tooth and claw. Darwin realized this, and that seems to be behind his rejection of a belief in an altruistic God in heaven. But it's not only in the natural world we see these horrors, there are also human-inflicted terrors that can be even on a mass scale. So seeing these two types of evil should cause a revulsion in people. The reality is, it should cause us to stop and realize that something is actually wrong. It shouldn't be like this. No one is really reconciled with death. Yet evolution says it is all perfectly normal.
One of the biggest problems people have with the God of the Bible is that if there's a God of love, how come there's so much death and suffering in the world? Now the Bible explains this because death and suffering in the Bible is a result of man's rebellion against their Creator. But evolution says that death and suffering are a natural part of what produced man in the first place. So evolution provides no comfort for those who are suffering, because suffering, is part of life. It's part of a struggle for existence.
There's another reason why an evolutionist will hold on to their belief system, even when all the fatal flaws are revealed. And that is because if evolution isn't true, it strongly points them in a different direction. Because really, if the universe and life didn't self-create, if it didn't happen spontaneously, then there has to be a creator. And the creator is not likely to be some little green man from another galaxy. The creator is going to be Almighty God.
And so if God is truth, I'm going to try and orient my life in ways that conform with that. Whether that's the way I treat my wife and my children as a father and as a husband, whether that's the way I treat my old age and evolutionary colleagues with the utmost of respect, because I believe that they are people that are made in the image of God. They're no different from me. They're no different from anyone else that I know. And when we start off with that idea that God made all people and that He cares for all people, if we let that sit in our hearts for a little while, it really affects the way that we treat everyone we come in contact with.
Salvation doesn't result from intellectual activity. It doesn't come about through figuring out God or theology. It is a spiritual transaction. So for me, when I understood that God made a perfect creation, there was a literal fall, and that now God is restoring us by the sacrifice of His Son, it really transformed my faith. For although I was a Christian for 10 years, I was an incredibly weak Christian. And so every aspect of my faith was transformed by more fully submitting to God and believing His Word.
depending on where you believe you came from. If you believe you came from a mud puddle that was zapped by lightning and you evolved through the whole series of the animal kingdom, then there's no reason you can't behave like a lion. There's no reason you can't behave like animals. There's absolutely nothing that's different between you and the other species that we see around us. But if you believe in God, it changes everything. And so we looked at Darwin's comment about morality, which is basically, if you believe in evolution, there's no standard. And we looked at a bunch of other quotes last night, so we're not going to recover all those. We stopped with Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and read some of her quotes. She was truly a nasty woman. And you can see it by the fruit of her life, right? The thing she had a burning desire to do was to provide abortions everywhere. If that's your burning desire in life, you obviously have a flawed value system. All right, so we looked at originally a whole bunch of historical figures, and then we were talking about modern day examples where the evolutionary philosophy affects people today. And one thing that's striking to me is a lot of these mass killers that we see who go in and shoot up schools, a lot of them do have an evolutionary base. They have a atheistic worldview. Some of them, like the Columbine shooters, when they went in, they wore shirts that said natural selector. So they very much so were affected. Some of them went in and they specifically targeted Christian students. Now, granted, there's obviously mental illness, there's other things that are involved with a whole bunch of these. It doesn't all get laid at the feet of evolution. But evolution, back in the 1950s, every home in America basically had guns. I'm not trying to get into that specifically, but it was true. Almost every home had guns, and there weren't all these mass killings in it. Today, we're having mass killings regularly, and I think you can lay a lot of it at the feet of the children thinking they're evolved animals. I'm not sure what happens.
Wake up.
Got our attention, that's for sure. All right. So this was just a list that I could think of at my computer of atheistic mass shooters. It's not exhaustive. I'm sure there's others. Sir Julian Huxley. Is your mic on? Is there a mic on somewhere? Sir Julian Huxley said, "I suppose the reason why we leapt at the origin of species was that the idea of God interfered with our sexual mores." I think it's any accident that we're having more and more sexual immorality in our culture. As the level, you can almost see the direct, as our society believes less and less in God, the more and more we're pushing for all these sexual perversions. It's directly connected, and this man was honest enough to admit it. Some of the most disturbing aspects of evolution's implications on our culture are the way that modern day ethical reasoning people are very similar to Adolf Hitler when it comes to Down syndrome and all these other unwanted deformities. And their solution is you just kill all the Down syndrome babies in the womb. And so we're going to look at another video, a very powerful video. This young man just, well, I love it.
Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, just so there is no confusion, let me say that I am not a research scientist. However, No one knows more about life with Down syndrome than I do. Whatever you learn today, please remember this. I am a man with Down syndrome, and my life is worth living. Sadly, across the world, a notion is being sold that maybe we don't need research concerning Down syndrome. Some people say prenatal screens will identify Down syndrome in the womb, and those pregnancies will just be terminated. It's hard for me to sit here and say those words. I completely understand that the people pushing this particular final solution are saying that people like me should not exist. That view is deeply prejudiced by an outdated idea of life with Down syndrome. Seriously, I have a great life. I have lectured at universities, acted in an award-winning film and an Emmy-winning TV show, and spoken to thousands of young people about the value of inclusion in making America great. I have been to the White House twice, and I didn't have to jump the fence either time. Seriously, I don't feel I should have to justify my existence. But to those who question the value of people with Down syndrome, I would make 3 points. First, we are a medical gift to society, a blueprint for medical research into cancer, Alzheimer's, and immune system disorders. Second, we are an unusually powerful source of happiness. A Harvard-based study has discovered that people with Down syndrome, as well as their parents and siblings, are happier than society at large. Surely happiness is worth something. Finally, we are the canary in the eugenics coal mine. We are giving the world a chance to think about the ethics of choosing which humans get a chance at life. So we are helping to defeat cancer and Alzheimer's, and we make the world a happier place. Is there really no place for us in the world? Is there really no place for us in the NIH budget? On a deeply personal note, I cannot tell you how much it means to me that my extra chromosome might lead to the answer to Alzheimer's. It's likely that this thief will one day steal my memories, my very life, from me. This is very hard for me to say, but it has already begun to steal my mom from me. Please think about all those people you love, the way I love my mom. Help us make this difference. If not for me and my mom, then for you and the ones you love. Fund this research. Let's be America, not Iceland or Denmark. Let's pursue answers, not final solutions. Let's be America. Let's make our goal to be Alzheimer's free, not Down syndrome free. Thank you.
Thank you.
There are some countries that are celebrating the fact that they have 0 Down syndromers. Children like Frank, they're all eliminated. It's the Scandinavian countries that are making the most progress at eliminating Down syndrome. They're not eliminating the pregnancies, they're eliminating the births. They're pretty much at 100%. And so Frank Stevens has to be there in Congress justifying his life because of the effect of this evolutionary theory in our society. So when we discuss evolution and creation, and sometimes people say, oh, that doesn't matter. It matters to Frank Stevens. And it matters to a lot of people. It's not just Down syndrome. There's a lot of birth defects that they're trying to remove through abortion.
Just one point.
Yeah.
Most of the funding that went into creating the blood test for Down syndrome was funded by the March of Dimes. And they are doing the same thing for muscular dystrophy and for spina bifida. It is the March of Dimes that is funding the vast majority of the pre-screening, so these type of pregnancies can be terminated. It is their form of prevention. I will never give a dime to the March of Dimes.
And for those of you who don't know, it's obviously very personal. It should be personal for all of us. But Paul has a Down syndrome child. So.
But it doesn't stop there. The idea is now that you can select your child if they don't have, based on their hair color or their eye color, or how tall are they going to be, or how intelligent they're going to be.
After this slide, can we cue up the dinosaurs?
Yes.
Another avenue that we see this today in a very real way is assisted suicide. It's becoming a very common tourist destination. I believe it's Switzerland. They're calling it suicide tourism. And so some people who are sick are going there to die. Some people who are old and they just decide they want some help killing themselves. They're going to Switzerland and having doctors help them commit suicide. Obviously, it's a very different culture that is helping people kill themselves, that's killing off handicapped and disabled people. It's a very different culture than anything a Christian would view in what they want in a culture. So these are radically different things in this life. That it's going to affect your eternity too. So let's not get it confused. I mean, this is important for the spiritual, but it's also important here and now, and changes completely the way that a society views the value of human life. When you're a Christian, you're made in the image of God. That gives humanity a special value.
Just one more little comment.
Sure.
In Oregon, if you have stage 3 or more pancreatic or liver cancer, the state-run Medicaid will not pay for chemo. They will pay for your suicide pill. Oregon.
Yeah, Oregon, that's what I thought it was.
How do I get this to pull up in here? Oh, I think it just did. Okay. So I got a question about dinosaurs. I wasn't necessarily going to try to cover them because we only have 4 one-hour sessions. But I love dinosaurs. When I was a kid, I think I was 11 years old when Jurassic Park came out. At the time I was really little. I would have these little rubber dinosaurs with me all the time, and I love dinosaurs. I'm sure probably a lot of you were the same way. And Jurassic Park came out, and it was like an awesome movie and an awesome franchise. And they get it right? Dinosaurs and animals are living together. And I do think that that's what happened. I mean, dinosaurs and people live together, and I think there's pretty sufficient evidence that that happened. So I'm going to go through this slide. I know I said it's completely crazy to some people, but hopefully when I go through the slide, you'll see that it's not as crazy of an idea as it might first seem. Sorry, how do I get it to split screen? I'm bad with PowerPoint, and I'm even worse with Keynote. So, okay, cool. Thank you. All right. We'll start off in Job chapter 40. And it says in verses 15 through 19, God's power is shown in creatures. Behold now the behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats the grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinew of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. So, when you read through the book of Job, Job gets into this thing where he loses his family and he's in a very bad spot. He starts to question God. God shows up in a whirlwind and he starts making all these fantastic claims to Job about creation, about animals, about different things, and he says, stand up to me like a man, we're going to talk. And Job's in the middle of that here. And so he says, consider this creature, whatever it was, the behemoth. And there's one part of that, he says he bends his tail like a cedar. Now, in most of your Bibles, if you have a little commentary in there, most commentaries, they'll say this was a rhinoceros or an elephant. But there's a problem with that. A rhinoceros and an elephant's tail is not like a cedar tree. They have little stubby tails. And so whatever the creature was that was described in Job chapter 40 did not have a little stubby tail. That is not the way our elephants work. But it is the way a sauropod looks. That looks like a cedar tree. And so when you consider the behemoth, that's what I think is talking about in Job chapter 40. Job chapter 41, we get this other creature. Can you draw out the Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? This will not be a fish for us to get catfishing. That's not it. Can you put a reed through his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? Will you play with him as with a bird? Verse 6. Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, never do it again. I like that idea, right? Whatever this image, whatever this creature is, you go and fight him, you're not going to do it twice. You'll remember it. And then he goes on to explain more here. He talks about this creature having rows of scales. These scales are really strong. And this creature is really strong in his limbs. And we get this whole explanation. And then in 41, starting in verse 19 here. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, they are firm on him and cannot be moved. His heart is hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Most of the commentaries will say this is a crocodile. And when you read that description, how much of that sounds like a crocodile? A little bit.
The fire.
It's in the water. That's about it. And the scales. Those are about the only two things. A lot of people will jump in water with crocodiles. Not me. You see them all the time. You go to Animal Planet. You know, Steve Irwin was always doing it. I can't think of the new people that are doing it.
Swamp people do it.
Swamp people.
And
And they bring them up with a hook, don't they?
Yeah.
This creature, you're not going to bring him up with a hook. So, but the biggest thing is the fire coming out of the nostrils. And what does that sound like?
That's a dragon.
Dragon. I think dragons are nothing more than fire-breathing dinosaurs. And I know, again, that sounds insane, right? But you look at some of these dinosaurs and you look at their head structure. And we have no idea what all these chambers are for, what all this head design is for. This creature on your right, the Spinosaurus, that's the one that was in Jurassic Park, the one where they're in the river scene. And the big dinosaurs coming up out of the water, and we believe they probably lived in the water. And that is a creature you do not want to get with a fish on. I mean, crocodiles will be bad, but that thing you definitely don't want. And you don't want to face him with a spear. Crocodile, you might want to face him with a spear. But that thing, not so much. So many dinosaurs, we're still figuring out what these complex organs, what their head structure, they have all these complicated nasal cavities. The T-Rex has a head the size of a Volkswagen, the brain the size of a walnut, and its head is this big nasal cavity. What was all that for? Just making noise? Maybe. But it could have been used for something else. There's a beetle called the bombardier beetle, and it has 4 chemicals in its body. They're stored in 4 different chambers. Well, 3 of them are stored in one chamber together, and there's a 4th chemical that is stored in a separate compartment, and there's a little duct that comes out right where the other chemical will blow past. And that chemical neutralizes one of the 3 chemicals, leaving just the 2 chemicals, which when they're together, they burn. And so when you get something like a toad that comes up to try to eat this beetle, it spits this flaming liquid out of its butt. And obviously then the toad doesn't eat. So I'm just using this as an illustration that there are creatures in the world today that do produce fire from their bodies. And so is it possible that dinosaurs and dragons are the same thing. And I just want to consider dragons. Dragons, all of these places, and we're not going to read all this stuff, all of these places have dragon legends. Just go on to, I don't recommend Wikipedia often, but it has a nice chart on dragons. There is, I said 21, but I would say 22, because I think that the Hebrew Bible reports dragons with Leviathan. 22 cultures all around the world completely disconnected from each other that have a creature that they call a dragon, some variety of it. They're all big fire-breathing lizards. American Indians, Japanese, Chinese, Europeans, every European group of people, the French, the English, the Slovaks, the Serbs, everywhere, they had these fire-breathing lizards. It's pretty crazy that these same creatures would be everywhere. And they would have the same myth about the same creature. Why is it never a big chihuahua that is destroying civilizations and people are going to fight? Why is it always this fire-breathing lizard? And in cultures that have not talked to each other for thousands of years. And you have examples like the testimony from like old sea maps from the 1600s. You'll see on these kind of sea maps these big serpent-like creatures that they would say would attack their shipping boats. So next one, you're going to think I'm crazy. I might be getting a little bit into Ken territory. How do I get backwards? You have things like the Loch Ness Monster. And I know it seems crazy, but write down that link and listen to the testimonies of people who don't seem like crazy people. I mean, they seem like it's not the kind of thing that you get with some of these kind of people who you're like, dude, that guy's crazy. You listen to these testimonies, and some of these people, they seem legit. Lake Champlain creature, Mokele-Mbembe in the Congo forest, all kinds of creatures. This to me is incredibly fascinating. I remember this came out when I was in the middle of my creation evolution studying. And I didn't need anybody to tell me what this was evidence for. I saw it in Scientific America on the newspaper, on the newsstand, when it was first discovered. This woman, Mary Schweitzer, was studying dinosaur bones, and she noticed what looked like soft tissue. And so she pulled it out, she put it in a microscope, and she could stretch the tissue inside of the bone. And she looked at it, and she was able to pull DNA from these red blood cells. She was completely amazed. Like, because in her mind, how could you find blood cells that are still, you can still get DNA from, they're still, what would be the word I'm looking for? They're still,
polymerized.
Yeah, they're not living, but it's like a recently dead kind of thing. You can still see what the animal was on the inside. It's not all rock. So when she saw this, she was completely surprised at how this could possibly exist for millions of years, and be able to still sequence the DNA of a T-Rex from these bones. Her conclusion is, it's amazing that these red blood cells existed for millions and millions of years. Instead of saying, let me reevaluate my whole premise, she's not willing to do that. She's committed to her theology. She is some kind of a Christian, but she believes in the old ages and that humans and dinosaurs lived separately. By the way, how do we know that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago? What's the evidence? The layer of dirt they're buried in? That's what we're always told. Guess what? Sometimes people find them in their backyard. Top layer of dirt. There's like this whole thing about dinosaurs are always really deep, and that's how we know that they're that old. It's nonsense. Like, you see it all the time. People are like out doing stuff and they find a dinosaur bone. It's not this. There's not this geologic column where you always find starfish down here and humans are always up top. There's nowhere in the world where you can find a geologic column that's that way, except for in textbooks. So where did Charles Lyell get his dates? He was the one, we're actually getting into geology. Let me back up. I'm not going to go there right now. We're going to get to that later. So what happened with the dinosaurs? Well, first off, I think they were formed on day 6 of creation with humans. I think they went through the fall with Adam and Eve. And something I want for us to consider as we're thinking about the early people, what was unique about them that's not true about us? How long they lived, right? What were some of those dates? 969 years from Methuselah? So consider a very unique trait about lizards and snakes and reptiles. They never stop growing. So we get these lizards and stuff now that look kind of intimidating just the way they are. And they never stop growing. Now imagine this lizard that lives for 15 years and gets to be 6 foot. Let's imagine now he lives to be 1,000 years old. And he never stops growing the whole time. I think some of the lizards, some of the dinosaurs we probably still have today in little lizards. Obviously, they would have gone through the flood, and I think that's where we get the fossils. Just consider, actually, we're going to get to that later too, so I'm going to get into that. So, why would the dragons and the dinosaurs disappear? If you're a human and you have these big lizards that are constantly coming into your village and attacking your people, don't you think you'd want to get rid of them? I know copperheads. If I have copperheads on my property, they're going to be the first thing that goes. And so if you have this big, terrible lizard who's ruining your lifestyle, you're going to find where they live and you're going to kill them. And there's records of people doing that in China and in Britain, going and killing dragons. And so I think that what happened was you had dragons, dinosaurs. They were around. People knew about them. The Native Americans, they had what they called a thunderbird. And a lot of our modern drawings of thunderbirds look more like big eagles. But if you look at their cave drawings, they look a lot more like pterodactyls. They have a long tail and a thing on the end of their tail, just like a pterodactyl. There are stories about Indian kids being taken off by these thunderbirds that they had. And so what happened from all these animals? I think that we killed them off, we got rid of them. They faded from our memories through the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s, wherever we got rid of the last dragons. And so we forgot about them for hundreds of years, maybe even 1,000 years, 1,500 years. And then we find these big nodes. And they've been gone for 1,500 years, 2,000 years, however long. And then we're trying to figure out what they were. And then we come up with all this theology, because after the dinosaurs' bones are found, we've already adopted millions of years, and so we just put them right in there, because nobody remembers dinosaurs, dragons anymore. So I think that that's how dinosaurs fit until they unearthed. All right, can we get back to the other slides? Questions, thoughts? Think I'm insane? It's okay.
Well, and that Job reference said that their bones were tubes of bronze. Many of the, like T-Rex, had the bone structure of birds. And they're finding out that a lot of the dinosaurs had feathers. And bird bones are tubular, they're empty inside. And they're not solid bones like mammals have. And so they, again, the Bible is correct that many of these bones were empty inside and tubular. And so, just an interesting fact that they're finding out more and more.
Yeah.
One slide and then the video for cosmology. Did you want to go there?
Let's maybe hold off a minute. Just pick any other side of radioisotopes.
What? Just think of cows had a spark.
We were trying to get our house ready to sell, so I was working on getting things done, and then I was putting slides together later. And I realized I put together all just examples of radiocarbon after the fact, and didn't use any of the other radioisotopes. So what radiometric dating is the sun produces carbon in all living animals, produces these radioisotopes in all living creatures. And when you die, these radioisotopes start to decay out. And so you can measure how long something's been dead by figuring out how much of these radioisotopes are still left in something, to an extent. And we'll look at the reasons why that's not totally foolproof. So the first thing I'm going to do is go through, actually I think all I have is examples of where these are inconsistent. And I did put some things in here, but we'll talk about it. So looking through, if these radioisotopes are true, they should always be consistent. Like, you should be able to look at it, and for example, this woolly mammoth, the lower leg of this woolly mammoth and its flesh should not be 2 different ages, if this is a foolproof plan, and they are. There were some mollusk shells that were tested, and when they sent it away for analysis by these radiocarbon tests, they were dated to be 2,300 years old. All right, so this is a quote from one of these scientists who do these radioisotope tests. And he said, if a C14 date supports our theories, we put it into the main text of the document. If it doesn't entirely contradict it, we put it in a footnote. And if it is completely out of date, we just drop it. And I didn't include some of these things, but they've had some fossils or some radioisotope tests from Australia where the people, I think, were 200,000 years old, and they didn't believe Australians were there for that long, so they just kind of got rid of them. And there's a lot of examples where they do just that, what the scientists are saying they do. Again, a freshly killed seal. I'm sorry about these small letters. A freshly killed seal was carbon dated as having died 1,300 years. Again, another mammoth that they had frozen. A part of it was dated at 40,000 and another part was 26,000. And around the carcass they had other stuff and it was dated at 10,000 years. And so, a quote here from a geologist at Berkeley. A geologist at Berkeley Geochronology Center, Carl Schweitzer, uses the most advanced techniques to date human fossils. Last spring, he was reevaluating Homo erectus skulls found in Java in the 1930s by testing the sediment found with them, a hominid species assumed to be an ancestor of Homo sapiens. Erectus was thought to have vanished some 250,000 years ago, but even though he used 2 different dating methods, Swisher kept making the same startling find. Erectus was thought to have vanished, the bones were 53,000 years old at the most, and possibly no more than 27,000 years. A stretch of time that contemporaneous with modern humans. So I obviously don't even agree with that. But they're using these tests and they're completely debunking the other parts of their theories, and they still won't say that then these men are from only 50,000 years ago. Like they would still say, well, he's still from 250,000 years ago, but somehow this must be a contaminated site. And that's what they're saying is the site was contaminated. Are you thinking something new?
No, you're right. I mean, there's the whole issue of contamination always as well, and there's ways that people try to explain away their discordant data.
If it doesn't agree, if it would have been a 250,000-year-old test, then it would have been, hey, it's great. Right. Since it wasn't, it's contaminated. And so when the evidence doesn't match, then it's not evidence. If it matches, then it is evidence. Again, shells from a living snail were carbonated as being 27,000 years old. No matter how useful it is, though, the radiocarbon method is still not capable of yielding accurate and reliable results. There are gross discrepancies, the chronology is uneven and relative, and the accepted dates are actually selected dates. This whole blessed thing is nothing but 13th century alchemy, and it all depends upon which funny paper you read. Right, and so the video, they do a better job than what I just did. But basically, a lot of it depends on, well, I'm just going.
Sure. No, not the same.
Many people are of the opinion that scientists can make direct measurements using this techniques of billions of years ages for rocks. And they use this then to discredit the history of the Bible. And this is really not the case. The physics behind radiometric dating is relatively straightforward. We have a radioactive element called a parent, which transforms over time into a non-radioactive element called the daughter. And this happens with a characteristic rate referred to as a half-life. That's the length of time that it takes half the parent element to transform into an equal amount of the daughter element. So over time, the amount of parent in the rock decreases and the amount of daughter in the rock increases. A scientist can use very powerful machines to measure either directly the amounts of these two elements or their ratio, and this ratio then can be used in a theoretical calculation along with the half-life to calculate an alleged age for the sample. Let me give you some examples. Radioactive carbon-14 decays to nitrogen-14. Uranium decays to lead. Potassium-40 decays to argon-40. And all of these are used in radiometric dating.
We don't actually measure the age with these methods. We actually are measuring the amount of these isotopes in the rocks or fossils. And it's an interpretation using certain assumptions about these amounts that give us the age. But the age is actually not measured directly.
For many radiometric dating techniques, one of the assumptions is that there is no daughter element present in the rock when it is formed, which of course we can't know unless we're actually there and can take a sample of the rock immediately after it was formed and do an analysis. Now, a small amount of daughter present at the time the rock is formed, if the rock is actually billions of years old, will not have a very significant impact on the calculated age. But if the rock is actually only a few thousand years old, even a very, very tiny amount of daughter present at the time the rock is formed will have a huge impact and give the rock appearances of being billions of years old. Another assumption in radiometric dating is that the rate at which the parent element transforms to the daughter element has been constant over time. Now, this has generally been borne out by experiments in the past, but recently some scientists in the US and Europe determined that the transformation rate of at least some elements, notably cobalt-60, cesium-137, silicon-32, and radium-226, do indeed vary with time. Now, they don't understand why this is, but they have noted that the rate varies with the distance between the Earth and the Sun. Now, the importance of this with respect to radiometric dating is that the assumption that the transformation rate is constant is clearly not true in the short term, and therefore may well be not true in the long term, which of course would invalidate the calculated ages. Some additional evidence for this is an experiment that was spearheaded by the Institute for Creation Research, in which some scientists found zircon crystals with unexpectedly large amounts of helium in them. Now, helium is a byproduct of the decay of uranium-238 to lead-206, and based on the ratio of lead to uranium in these zircon crystals, the calculated radiometric age was 1.5 billion years. But helium escapes from these crystals very quickly, so if the crystals really were 1.5 billion years old, then essentially all of the helium should have escaped. So the large amounts of helium that were found indicate that the crystals can't be 1.5 billion years old, and maybe the transformation from uranium to lead-206 was faster in the past. A third assumption is that the rock has remained a closed system from the time of its formation. What that means is that no parent element or daughter element has been either added to or removed from the rock during its history by any number of potential chemical or physical processes. For radiometric dating to be valid, all of these assumptions must be true. If they are not, the results are not reliable.
The standard way that an old age geologist provides a date for a fossil, say that dinosaurs died out 65 million years old, is not by dating the fossil itself, but by dating the rocks that are nearby the fossil and using the dates of the rocks as a bracket. They'll use radioactive dating methods to say that this rock is 65 million years old, there's dinosaurs underneath them, therefore the dinosaurs can be no younger than 65 million years old. An interesting question to ask would be whether or not radioactive dating methods that are applied to the fossils actually correspond to the radioactive dating methods that apply to the rocks. If the two are in agreement, then perhaps an old age geologist has a strong argument for the age in fossils. But if you get two different ages for things that are supposed to be the same age, then either one is right, the other is right, or neither one is correct.
Many people think carbon dating can be used to date things that are millions or even billions of years old. However, because of its half-life, carbon dating can only be used, theoretically, to date things that are at most a few tens of thousands of years old. Because after that length of time, so much of the carbon-14 is decayed that there's not enough of it left to be detected, even with today's modern instruments.
If the whole Earth was pure carbon-14, it could only last about 1 million years before it's all gone and we couldn't detect it. And yet, we repeatedly find carbon-14 in objects which are claimed to be millions and even billions of years old, including diamonds. But the fact that we're finding carbon-14 shows they can't be millions or billions of years old. So carbon-14 is in fact a very strong ally of the biblical timescale and strong evidence against the millions of years of evolution.
What dating of fossils has shown us over time is that there is carbon-14 in the fossil material. This is true whether or not they are fossils of mosasaurs, or fossils of seashells, or fossils of petrified wood, or any of the varieties of fossil fuels that we have, especially coal and oil and natural gas. Samples of these have been analyzed since the 1970s and consistently show us ages that there shouldn't be if they were in fact millions of years old. Coal is a particularly interesting case for carbon-14. Coal is the remains of plants that have been compressed, and so they were part of the ecosystem and had an active connection to carbon-14. It's found globally, and it's found throughout the geological record. When creation scientists sampled coal seams from different places and analyzed them for the amount of carbon-14, they found that regardless of where they were collected or from what layers of geology they were found, they all registered statistically the same amount of carbon-14. So with the coal seams, rather than providing evidence of gradual deposition and formation of coal over tens or hundreds of millions of years, the identical amounts of carbon-14 in all of the samples that were collected actually shows that they were all buried within the recent past.
Even though radiometric dating seems like a very scientific process, we've seen from measurements that it produces highly erroneous results. And due to the unknowable assumptions that are behind its normal application, it is unreliable and untrustworthy in many cases.
But were there any questions or thoughts about what we've gone through so far? I don't know everything, but if you give me a question you have now, I can probably do some research. To me, the one interesting thing about the radiocarbon is that when you have things like brand new rocks that were just formed, and they come right out of the volcano and they're already dating at millions of years old. To me, that is a very, like if you took that same rock and put it somewhere far away from the volcano and asked the scientists how old that rock is, they would tell you it's millions of years old. Obviously, everything's as old as the Earth is. In reality, it's just melted down rock. But when it comes out brand new from the volcano, it's dating that age. Obviously, it was just made. And then obviously, all the dating methods of the animals that are living, being old, and stuff like that, just kind of shows those inconsistencies with that dating technique.
Well, when we think about the creation record in Genesis, just using Adam and Eve as one example, but it pertains to other things as well, is that they were created with the appearance of age. They weren't created as children. They were created as adults. So even though they were just created, they had the appearance of age. So it is reasonable to assume that God would have created the world not just as being at the very beginning, but that it would have had the appearance of age as well.
And that's my thoughts in a lot of ways, but we'll get to it. It's startling. I mean, that's one of the things that the people who believe that the universe